wanted to have a discussion about glazes, okay? There is really not enough time in an hour, and I could show you some a few techniques that have helped me along the way. But I really just want to talk about from the time I started glazing things to where I am now, and how much I've learned and what I've learned about glazes since I've owned this place, since I've traveled to many studios, seen a lot of glaze workshops along the way, and I actually intend to try and bring in some real experts on glazing in the next year. The workshops here that will spend a little bit more time. I cannot tell you anything in specifically 90 minutes that it's really going to be like this is a glaze workshop. Okay. The things that I run into all the time is that people are just may not really know the differences why they want to mix their own glazes versus why they want to buy commercial glazes. Should I buy this in dry? Should I buy the raw materials and try and mix my own glazes? What are the caveats of doing that? What are the pros and cons? That's probably the number one thing that I run into. I get people all the time asking me about all those brushing glazes that we have in there. We got big long walls and stuff, and they're really confused by them as to the proper application of these things. Okay, how can you get something that's not quite as garish as just a bright yellow, low fire glaze or something? How can you make these things look more interesting? These things are really by far the most common things I run into. Low fire glazes, I want to start talking about those. And then we'll work to mid-fire glazes. We'll talk about some high fire glazes and the pros and cons of each. I want to show you how you can make a brushing, a dry dipping glaze into a brushing glaze. How you can make a brushing glaze into a dipping glaze. How you could glaze something that you've fired once already and didn't like the result. Okay, a couple of those little things I'll show you. And definitely, give me a question or two. The things that you run into with the glazes that you use, especially if you get them from here. I've probably seen them and dealt with them already. Things like this, okay? This is a pot that I threw and glazed. And I put it out front in the showroom for a while, a year or two ago. And people were like, wow, what is that glaze that you use, okay? 9 out of 10 people looked at it and went, well, that's a cone 10 high fire, like reduction glaze. That was fired in a gas kiln somewhere. But this is actually cone 05, low fire glaze, which is not the same as what you're used to seeing. And it's because of the newer types of glazes that are out there and the application, the layering of these glazes. If you're not already using and making test tiles, I would strongly suggest that you do. I'll put this right here so everybody can take a look at it. But this is it's a low fire set of glazes, and there are 4 glazes that are on this thing. And it was really all about the application and the layering of the glazes that give it a different look. They gave it a high fire look. Everyone thinks that this is a cone 10 because of that broken surface and the change in the modeling from matte to to gloss and whatnot. But these sorts of effects are really easy. It's a purple to green breaking glaze, and that's what's on the entire piece, including all around the bottoms here.
Did you spray it?
This is everything is brushed on. This was brushed on the entire piece. Okay? So 2 coats of that were brushed onto the entire piece. And that's what you see on here. Oh, come on.
Brush on the glazes. Isn't there a lot of inconsistencies though?
Inconsistencies can be worked through, and I'll show you. I'll show you a few things that I do. Definitely. At least 2 coats of glaze, unless it's a clear or something that you're specifically doing that you want only one coat. But it needs at least 2, and you have to vary the way that you put that on. Okay? You brush. When I brushed this on, I went with my brush around in a circle. I started at the bottom, and I went about as wide as my brush could go, and I went a little higher, I tried to work those edges, those seams between lines. Okay? No, I did this by hand. I kind of flipped it over on a big. Actually, I got these sort of foam rings that I use. I got a big piece of foam and kind of cored out the center of it, and then so that I could set something upside down in that piece of foam. You could get foam from the foam factory. There's a place like it over in Oakland, and there's a place in Palo Alto called House of Foam. You know, you could get them. You can even use old mattress pads and pillow pads and things like that. Those are great. The second coat, though, was in the complete opposite direction. It was laid on vertically. Okay. If I was to apply a 3rd coat and a 4th coat, I would keep that crosshatch thing going. Okay. Heck, I might even go on the diagonal. You know, just so that you will get very even. You can get as even a coat as if you had dunked it, a cylinder straight down into a bucket of glaze. By brushing on, if you do that cross-edge technique.
When you got to the center, you just kind of end up crossing over as you came to the center.
Yeah.
One side and then the
Yeah.
other side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I work like that. I will glaze the bottom half. Okay, I'll let that dry until I can turn it over, and I will glaze this top half on a big piece like this. Now this has, like I said, 4 glazes on it. The second glaze I applied with a brush, this blue glaze, this dark blue glaze that you see up here. Okay, I went around with this, and I applied it with the wide brush in sort of a. You can see it in a couple places. Like I made kind of a line here, and then I crossed over and I made a line there, and I crossed over and I made a line there. I applied in these sort of half moon shapes. Turn the piece to the half moon shape, so that I would promote areas that would break and drip, okay, and give you that look. Yeah. No, this is all. Yeah. This is all letting glazes dry between coats.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's big. We use a lot of
An
them in our
important thing.
studio. And if I notice my students brushing and then being anxious and brushing before it's absolutely dry, no sign of a brush mark. They got brush marks when it comes out of the kiln if they don't let it dry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
big time.
Because then you'll start pushing around the glaze that's already there.
Yeah.
Okay, instead of laying another coat on. Very important. Yeah, very good point. And if I do these sort of patterns, to me they kind of match the shape. You get kind of movement this way and that, and that will. You get glaze to move in a certain direction. If I brush this glaze down here, and I do it a couple of times, I'm going to promote this thing to continue that if it's going to drip a little bit if I put this on really heavy. Okay? The next glaze that went on this guy was my leaf green glaze number 10. It's a low fire glaze, and it's green, and it's made with copper, and it has a lot of depth to it. The copper glazes themselves, they didn't used to have have us label them differently in low-fire glazes, but in schools now, they're paying more and more attention not to just lead, but to all metals in glaze and the content of those metals. So if it has copper in it, we have to label a glaze that it has copper in it. Simply because the content of copper is becoming more and more important as a safety hazard. But that copper acts as a flux in glaze. Not only is it a colorant, at low temperatures and in oxidation, it's this green glaze, right? But copper's something that does a lot of things depending on how you fire. It's a volatile material. It fumes in firing. It comes off of the pot. I'll talk a little bit about that when we get to high fire. But this glaze particularly, it's a transparent gloss. It's not really an opaque gloss. The transparent glosses tend to have more flux in them, and they flow. They go into low parts on textural pieces to show greater depth. They break on the surfaces or the edges of things to, and that gives it just a more dramatic effect. So I loaded that on there so that I would get this dripping effect coming down. And because this is sort of a satiny sort of surface, whenever you have this buttery satin surface, especially on low fire glazes, they are extremely stable. I can layer 4 coats of some of these satin glazes on because I know that they're stable. Some of the ones that are art glazes that have a broken sort of semi-matte, semi-gloss breaking to them, some of those, depending on the ingredients, can flow and drip. But generally, your satin glazes, you can layer them on pretty good, and they act as a good place for those ones that do run, those glossier glazes, to run into and break.
Matt, do you find that they ever prohibit a break from a?
They will keep. Yeah, I suppose if you don't put enough of a runny glaze on there, if I only put one little thin coat of the runnier blue and green glazes, the glossy ones at the top, then I wouldn't have as much. A vertical surface also makes a difference.
Yeah.
I could load it up on something like this because it's got a very low slope to it. It's not like diving straight down. Vertical pieces, you got to be a lot more careful with vertical pieces. But I've been doing really well with making and selling these things, and people just potters. We've been doing it for 20 years or more. They look at it and they go, "Oh, what is that? Is that like a copper matte or a barium glaze or something like that?" They think that it's cone 10 high fire. It's 04. You can do it with Bisque.
So talk about how you do your test tiles to be able to determine.
If you're not using it making your own test tiles, you should.
The textile. I mean, I've done tests, but little things to do the coating and then know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
It's a test piece.
Test pieces. Really, that's the answer.
I do that too, but that's sure you wouldn't use that as a test piece, would you?
Oh no. That I'd experimented with some of these glazes already. I kind of know going in the characteristics of art glazes and matte glazes, that when you can see in some places where this glaze was kind of stable up here, but once it hit that steeper curve, you could see that it dripped. You can see the drip mark on there. See where it hit that steeper slope, and they took off. Yeah, you can see them all over the sides, right? Where it's stable down here, but it hit that steep side, and it started to move. Really started to take off. So low fire glazes themselves, definitely something that you can experiment and layer to get these effects, and that will get you away from thinking that these things are just they're for kids. You know what I mean? That they're not as nice, you know, as the high fire glazes. I've got a couple of pots that I didn't bring out here, just in a rush, that I want to show you, and these will pass around. The firing of these low fire glazes can be done on low fire clay, obviously, but you can also do them, and they can be stable, and they can be functional, and you can use them on high fire clay, okay? High fire clay, which has greater workability, you know? It's just easier to use, easier to manage.
Are you saying you can use it on high fire clay that you're not taking to temperature, or you can use low fire glazes in a cone 10 firing?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
body.
We're not using low fire glazes in
Gotcha.
cone 10 firing.
Okay.
Although there are some people that use low fire glazes very successfully in mid fire, and that will take some trying, some testing, and sometimes these people will actually make little catch basins or put their pieces on stilts because that low fire glaze will flow more. Okay, but there are a couple of people, and one I'd encourage you to look up. His name is Fong Chu, Fong, and I think it's CHOO, Fong Chu. He makes teapots. He uses low fire commercial glazes. He makes teapots. He uses low fire commercially made glazes like Dunkin' and Western Natural and all these make them. And he fires these things to the mid-fire range on mid-fire porcelain. Okay. Sometimes they flow a lot, and he has to use a catch basin or you puts a stilt underneath or something like that, and he sands or grinds the bottom clean. But he gets some absolutely spectacular effects using low fire and mid fire. And some of these glazes will do it. I get people who come in all the time. They're taking a class, they're new at it. They go, oh, we're doing cone 5. So they grab a 05. Glaze off the shelf, come over, put it on the counter. I love that red, you know. And then they fire it to cone 5. They come back and they go, what's wrong with this, you know? And I go, what'd you do? I fired it to cone 5. 05? What's that? It happens, but sometimes I get people that take these glazes and they put them on their pieces like that, and I see something that I've never seen before, okay? Because I simply haven't done it, you know? I haven't, and I'll see a low fire glaze on a big fire piece and be like shocked, you know? And it worked, and it was amazing. We have a series of glazes out there that are low fire glazes, and they're leaded, okay? But these leaded art glazes, which when you use the proper, you know, safety gear when you're using these to apply them, and after they've been fired, you know, the pieces themselves are safe, you know, unless you're storing your food inside them, okay? Once it's on the pot, once it's on the piece, on the base or whatever, it's inertic once again, okay? It's safe to handle. If this were covered in leaded glazes, but it's been fired already, they're perfectly safe. They're encapsulated in the glass and in the matrix, and they're stable. I can't inhale the lead off of that at this point, okay? It's only when you're working in that state. If you make dry powder and inhale, that's the danger. Or if I want to store my tomato soup in a lead-lined piece, okay? Fiesta ware is famous from Mexico for having bright colors, and everyone go down to Mexico and have a great old time. And they go, ooh, I'm a potter, and I love this pottery. And they come get this bright red and orange and yellow stuff. That boy, why don't we got that in the United States? They make great stuff here. And for years, you know, Fiesta ware was amazing, you know, popular stuff, but you use really toxic, you know, lead and uranium and all kinds of things like that. These glazes that made these colors that really pop, but they were using it on the insides of things. Okay, use a white liner. Nothing is ever gonna be wrong with a glossy white liner glaze. Okay, it's safe. Makes a hard white surface. It's easy to clean. You know, you can see if you got a little speck of stuff on it. You know, just use a white liner glaze and put those great colors on the outside. A lot of people do that. And the pieces are safe. I want you to think about a couple more questions right now. I'm going to grab those 2 pots that I said. They're right in the other room. With high fire clay, okay? And again, we're not talking about. Forgot one. We're not talking about firing low fire glazes at high fire temperatures. We're talking about altering your bisque cycle, how you bisque pieces. Now, if you look at these are low fire glazes on cone 10 high fired porcelain. So it's got all the durability and the strength of high fired porcelain, but it's got the bright glazes and effects that you can get with low fire glaze that you cannot get in cone 10. Sometimes there are plenty of things that happen in low fire that are hard to replicate in high fire. Same way, there's some things you can do in high fire that are very hard to replicate in low fire. So this is a cone 10, both of these are cone 10.
So what was it
High
fired
fire.
at?
Okay, so here's the secret. You got to alter your bisque. Okay, traditionally, people don't pay attention to their bisque. They pay very little attention. They just want to get that done so they can glaze. But bisque firing is it can be just as important as your glaze firing. There are certain clays that need extra slow bisquing. Okay, because they contain a lot of matter that needs burning out. Okay, the dirtier your clays, meaning the more red they are, the more fire clay is in them, or if they're being stained somehow with other materials, like anyone's used the Cassius clay, the black clay that we sell here, or the dark brown, yeah, Cassius salt clay, Black Mountain, things like that. Those definitely need slow bisque firings. They need oxidizing bisque firings.
So slow, tell us what you mean literally
Slow. The slower you fire the bisque, the better it's going to make your glaze pieces turn out. You will have less pinholing, less crawling. You'll have less shivering or sometimes or bloating. You ever use the black clays or the dark clays and you get bloating, you get like bubbles in the surface? That's usually because of improper bisque firing. If you own your own kiln, make sure that you have a very oxidized bisque fire, okay? If they got peephole plugs, okay? In that kiln, you want to remove at least 1 or 2 of those peephole plugs. In bisque firing, if you do not have a vent, if you have the vent system attached that pulls air through the, you probably don't have to pull your peephole plugs. But if you don't have a vented kiln, I would pull those peep plugs out because you want a nice. I usually pull the top and the bottom because what happens is that the convection, the heat will tend to move up towards and it'll tend to pull air in through the bottom peephole and it'll exit through the top. You ever looked at your peepholes and seen that sort of that little flare on the metal on the outside of discoloration? When you burn clay, you're producing gases, outgases. 10% out of this clay right here, they're a 25-pound bag. 2.5 pounds of that bag is organic matter that's going to burn out, and it needs to burn out. If you stack a bunch of plates one on top of the other real tight and it's a clay that has some iron in it, or is one of these dirtier clays, not pure like porcelain or whatever, you could be trapping some of those gases in between the foot rings and things like that. You ever bisque a plate and you see a ring of discoloration on the inside, on the plate from where something else was stacked on top of it? kind of discolored. It's slightly underfired in that spot because of that, and it's just different. Okay, the clay is not fired the same as the rest of the clay around it, and there could be materials in there that later on you might get a blister or a bubble in the glaze or something like that. You're like, why'd that happen? Well, that's why it's happening, because you're not getting good burnout in a thorough oxidation environment. Okay, so you might want to consider stacking your bisques a little less packed. I know I'm like, oh, Bisque fire, I got a bunch of stuff, I'll pack it in there, right? You want to do that, you know, because you can. There's no glaze. I can just stack them up. That's all well and good if if you've never had issues. But when you do have issues and you come in and you go, man, this is blistered, or this did something strange, I got to think of all the things, starting with the Bisque that you did. And it could have been simply, you could have pulled out your peepholes and you wouldn't have those things. It could be something that basic. A slower Bisque fire. Allows time for that stuff to burn out of your clay, so that it won't burn out when you got glaze covering the surface, and that glaze starts to form a glassy seal on it and traps those things. Because then the bubbles have to work their way not only just on the clay, but then through that molten glaze. If you have a highly viscous glaze or a thick coat of glaze, it's even longer, much longer, for it to work its way through.
Excuse me. So how does someone tell how slow the firing should be when you take this piece out? How do you tell if it's been all the organic material has been burnt out?
The question is how slow should it be, and how do you know if the things are burned out?
I do. In my bag.
The proof is in the pudding. The proof is actually in the glaze fire. Okay?
Before then.
Before then, how do you know? Okay, then you don't.
Exactly.
I know it's hard to say, but if you have an electronic kiln and you're doing your Bisque firings on medium, hit the slow button instead. If you got a programmable kiln, just it can be as simple as that. Just do it. When we fire for people here, every Bisque firing I do is on the slowest speed that that kiln fires. Sculptures and things, I double the length of the Bisque fire, because I know there's going to be thicker areas. So that's important. Get back to the point of how Glaze is in transferring to.
Transferring exactly.
I want to pass around another little chart.
I used it this morning. Okay, you have to get it started.
That will show you
Whoever brought it in was very sweet to do
a variety of
bring
the quality of the surface of that glaze. Okay, some glazes and clays, they're always going to get crazy on them, no matter what you do. But the majority of them, as a matter of fact, I had a phone call today. There was a gal that was using a red clay, like a terracotta or a Navajo wheel or something like that, and they were bringing that up to the mid fire. Well, actually, the low fire glazes that she'd always tried, Duncan, Western, they always craze on this red clay. And so I suggested to her, well, Bisque fire. What do you Bisque fire? She's like, I don't know, cone 04, 05, or whatever. I suggested that she move her Bisque up to cone 2. When she moved her Bisque fire to cone 2, all the crazing went away from her glaze, from her fired piece. It fit it. It fit it because she had taken that clay to a hotter temperature in the Bisque firing. That clay fused more, and the piece then fit her the clear glaze that she put on top without any crazing on it whatsoever. If you like the feel of a certain high fire clay, right? It has great working properties. The stout, the Orion stout that we have, has great hand building properties. It's very tough, very strong. The sculpture raku, They're different clays for different reasons that I like to use. Change the way you bisque fire them and you will change the results of your glaze. You can use brightly colored glazes. You can get interesting results. If I wanted this to hold water, actually I didn't line this with any glaze, but I certainly could have. If you want your pieces to hold water, you got to bisque them hotter. One of the most common things, a clay Bravo Buff. It's a really popular stoneware that we have. Oh, Bravo Buff. It's got a firing range that it fires in the mid-fire of cone 5 all the way up to cone 10. Okay? It works within that range because most glazes at cone 5 and most glazes at cone 10 fit that clay to the point where the clay is just vitreous enough at cone 5 that when you put a nice fitting glaze on there, it's completely impermeable and it's safe to use. Okay. At cone 10, it's more impermeable all by itself, right? And when you seal it with a glaze at cone 10, it becomes completely impermeable. Anyway, but that range of firing, that clay can work at multiple cones. A very popular thing to do with that glaze is to bisque it at cone 4 or cone 5, where it's right on the edge of being vitreous, and then use a low fire glazes on that clay. I've got a high school, and they use this technique to really great effect. They take their high fire clay, they do their bisque, not at normal temperatures, but at the mid-fire, at cone 5, and then they buy a bunch of Western and Duncan low fire glazes. They glaze them up, and they fire them to cone 05, low fire. There are a couple of things that work, okay, that you can add to your glazes to make them stick, okay, things that you can do. Like I said, you want to take that clay right up to the point of vitreousness, where it's not quite vitreous, okay? Where it still has a little bit of porosity in it, okay? That's just enough porosity for you to be able to apply a brush-on glaze or a low-fire glaze or something like that, and it will stick and it will soak in and it will bond well with that, okay? In this case, where I said this was cone 10, porcelain, fired all the way to cone 10, to apply glaze to something like this, normally, ooh, here's the demo. Oh, this was fired electric. And this is saving you energy, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. The two things, as far as additives, I want to show you. Okay. So you got a piece of porcelain that is high fired already, and it's difficult to reglaze with low fire glaze or any other glaze. When you brush it on, sometimes it starts to run already. It's hard to manage. It doesn't. It's extremely thin and it doesn't stay on. That's because the glaze is soaking it all in because it's not permeable still, so it's not drawing in, holding on to that glaze and sucking it in. Things you can do: one, thicken your glaze. Use take out a scoop of glaze out of your bucket, mix up your glaze, take out a scoop, right? And set that aside for a little while until it starts to separate and take off some of that water. Create just a thicker mix of your glaze. Or if you're planning on doing this, plan on mixing it with less water. Okay, so you got a thicker glaze. Right here, I've just got a thicker glaze that I mixed up over there in that jar. And you can see, because it's thicker, it's not running, it's not watery. When you mix up 11 or 12 ounces per pound dry, and you're trying to mix up a dry glaze yourself, you're mixing it up to a dipping consistency for a piece that is low fire bisque and very absorbent. just mix it thicker, and it's less likely to run. Okay?
Will it run more in firing, being glazed initially like that?
Not really. Not really. This is going to take a little longer. What you can also do is you can heat your pieces up to 150 degrees or so. You know, that's enough where you can still handle them. It's not going to burn you. Okay. The pieces will be, you know, warm, hot to the touch, but not, you know, it's not going to fry you. Another thing you could do is you can add an additive. We have an additive that has worked really, really well for me. It's called APT, Ceramic Enhancer. We have one for low fire that's in a blue bottle. We have one for high fire in porcelain. It's in this little red bottle. It's an organic, well actually it's got polymers in it, and acrylic polymers that help act as a suspending agent and a bonder. If I take some of my glaze out of the bucket that I didn't mix thicker because I knew I wanted to apply it, but is at that dipping consistency, so it's still kind of watery maybe, and I try and brush it on, and all it does is run off the side. It's very hard to brush on. You add some of this, and it will thicken that glaze quite a bit.
And it won't leave any residue?
So if you have, you know, look at this is more like a thin glaze, as, you know, as it pours. This is glaze at a consistency that you're used to seeing in your bucket, right? Glaze as you're used to seeing in the bucket, you know, just kind of loose glaze. When I add some of this, and all this takes is a little shot like that. This becomes, now I'm starting to do it. It's actually starting to, it's a thickening and almost clump, but I mix it well. We do this all the time when I got my students where I teach at, that they didn't like the way their piece worked out. So I can get that thinner glaze to brush on better. See, so this was thicker glaze that I applied, and this is the thin glaze that I applied. But I added the APT, and now it's not just dripping off the pot, it's staying in place. Right? So the APT really works to make, well, it's dripping a little bit. I could add a little bit more. But it'll thicken up that glaze enough that you can apply it. Okay? Things like gum can also be applied in order to make this a dipping glaze, a brushing glaze. The pros and cons of these commercial glazes and mixing your own glazes. If you plan, I tend to see that if you go to the higher temperatures, over time, even with a higher initial investment, mixing your own glazes is more economical. It really is. But you might have to invest in a couple $100 worth of raw materials to get started. And you gotta, and there are considerations with that. But overall, they're cheaper in the long term. You have greater control with a glaze that you mixed up. You know the ingredients. You can make variations to that one thing. You can take a base glaze you mix up a base, you bought the ingredients by the sack, cuts the cost way down. You gotta store that sack. You mix up a base, you can then use that base to create a number of different glazes. Okay? That's an advantage. Otherwise, you gotta come down here and you gotta buy 5, 6 different glazes and store those, commercial glazes, where you can mix up one base glaze, okay, and make variations of it. This is one of the 1,000 bowls that we made for charity. But this glaze is a base glaze called Stony Matte Glaze. It's a high fire glaze that we make. But this Stony Matte Glaze is actually one of the most popular glazes that I sell. You look at it and go, why is that the most popular? It's because it works really well with stains and other things to create different glazes. Okay? And it's very simple to buy a base glaze. Maybe you don't have to mix your own base glaze. In the long term it would be cheaper. But you could buy a base glaze, an inexpensive glaze like Stony Matte or something like that, and tint that. Okay? Our Cone 10 clear glazes, our Cone 5 clear glazes, these dry glazes that are white or cream or clear. These can all be tinted with oxides, cobalt. This one was simply dipped in this Stony Matte glaze, but then a small wash of cobalt was used to highlight the rim and to put that little decoration on the inside. Cobalt and water, or cobalt mixed with a little bit of a base flux, like Gersley borate and a teeny bit of clay, makes a nice wash. Okay, but keep looking over, because I have another example of the same glaze in which we mix some green stain into it. Isabel walked off because I wanted her to wash the bowl. Come back to the bowl. She'll be back in a moment. But that is the same glaze that was tinted with mason stain. Okay? Now we sell these mason stains because we have little 2-ounce sample jars. They're right below the under glazes outside there. And you can use that little 2-ounce sample to add to a base glaze, and you can get any number of colors working with that base. A very popular one over at Blossom Hill Crafts is a glaze called Jade or something like that, teal. She uses she buys a couple of these base glazes from me in bulk. She stores them in back, and she makes 3 or 4 colors at least out of the selection that she has there, simply by adding cobalt to our Chun glaze. She has Chun blue, right? She adds a teal mason stain to the Stony Matte. She has a glaze called teal or jade. You know, very simple and cost-effective to buy base glazes and then use these tints. Works out really well. So you might buy an inexpensive glaze of clear or white or something like that, and use that as your base to mix in oxides and in mason stains. You want light colors, you go with a clear. Here's hot. Yay! Same glaze. Same glaze. 2% mason stain added to it. Okay? It changed it. It's not quite as glossy. That stain kind of toned it down a little bit. Took a little bit of the gloss away. You can add things that will matten the glaze and make it less glossy and buttery. I'll just pass them around. You see the difference in quality of the glaze just because of what was added to it.
So, the color in the mason things usually pretty intense. So, a 2% comes pretty close.
Well, okay. 2%, 4%, 5%, 10%. I would really suggest
Starting slow.
start low, use test tiles, okay? A good thing to do is to take a cup of this stuff, right? You can measure out, you know, measure out 100 grams of it, right? And make 100 grams, add 2 grams of powder to it, 2%, right? Mix it up, brush it on or pour it onto a test towel. Add another 2% to that same jar, that same little thing. Mix it up. Add it, okay? Or you know, do it by 5% increments or something like that. And then brush it on. Heck, just make one big tile and brush it on here, brush it on there, brush it on there, and see what that does. Add a little cobalt. Add a little bit of rutile. Add a little bit of copper. Those are very strong colors. And see what it does. Very easy to change the colors of these things. Base glazes are expensive and easy to manipulate, easy to change. In the long run, you can save the money, but you got to store these things. Okay.
Find a friend to split it with.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Find a friend to split it with. Those stackable, storable buckets with like the opening bins or something like that stack. Those are really great for a home studio. Usually, when you're working in these materials, you got higher volumes than the commercial glazes. Commercial glazes, you buy a pint, you spend $8, it's pre-mixed, it's right there. You didn't have to do anything else. You know? And when you're mixing glazes and dealing with this, you have to consider safety. Okay, you got to wear a mask if you're going to be mixing up with glazes. Okay, anytime you use dry glazes, you got to wear that safety equipment. Now, as far as buying a commercial glaze right off the shelf, like we have over here, that's already mixed up, there are pros and cons to those. Some of the cons of buying that ancient Jasper glaze, you know, the Cone 5 one that's been in all the ads in Ceramics Monthly for Amoco, is that, okay, you made some pieces, maybe you sell your pieces. Well, you got it, and so does she, so does she, so does he, you know. Anybody can do what you did. Okay, when you're creating and altering, you know, you alter one of these glazes, one of these bases. That's why they're a base glaze. They're there for you to create your own glazes. Okay, put your own name on it. Call it what you want to call it. It's your glaze. Okay, you've modified it. You've come up with your own ideas. Plus, with commercial glazes, and I get this all the time as well. You know, I may have 300 colors of glaze on the wall, 400 colors of glaze on the wall. You don't have the color I'm looking for. Exactly. Pea. The color of a pea green, not a snap pea, but like, you know, the French bean, you know, or something like that. I'll go, really? We got 500 colors in my showroom, but I don't have the one you want, right? That's what commercial glazes, you know, that's another caveat, okay? You can't find it, you're relying on these and you can't find it, well, you're stuck. But if you make your own glazes, you can test, you can add things, you can mix your own colors and make it on your own. Yeah. Shelf lives, yes. Even though some of them don't have dates, they have them stamped on them, shelf life of a commercial glaze is usually about a year. There's reasons. There's reasons.
Wet ones or dry ones?
Wet ones. Dry ones, no shelf life. Dry glaze, no shelf life at all. There's nothing that I haven't seen that's. I've gotten 30 and 40-year-old buckets of feldspar from somebody, from my grandma's studio or something like that. But I've gotten feldspar. Works, it's fine. Dry stuff, indefinite, okay? Pre-mixed glazes. In order to make a pre-mixed glaze brushable, we have to add gum to them. Gum. This is gum solution. We sell gum solution. Little bottle. You ever tried to brush a Cone 10 glaze on a freshly bisque pot? And you get a little bit on a brush, you pull it about that far, and it becomes rough, it drags, it gums up, it sticks, it doesn't flow, right? You can't brush them on. It soaks in too quickly, and it's powder, and your brushes turn into powder, and nothing works, right? Gum solution. This is gum solution. We sell this. This is what you add to your dipping glazes to make them a brushing glaze. Okay? What this does, what this gum does, is it encapsulates the water molecules in this in the gum, in the cellulose of the gum, and it extends the brushability and slows down the absorption of the water, and makes it very, very brushable. So you can take that glaze that you just wanted to brush on and touch up these spots, or do half the piece with it because you can't wax it, you can't pour it, you can't dip it, but you want to put this color in this one spot. The only way to do it is brushing, but you can't brush the darn glaze because it just doesn't flow. CMC gum solution. You can buy powdered CMC gum, mix it with water. I would use distilled water and CMC gum. And it will keep for a while, keep for about a year at the most. This you want to use, mix up when you can, buy the dry powder.
Pretty thin.
It doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take a lot. Or you just buy that solution, it's all mixed up for you. And you add this solution to your glazes and test it, see how well it brushes. Add a little bit more, see how well it brushes, until the point you get something that you can flow that glaze on.
So can you add that to commercially prepared glazes as well?
Most commercially prepared glazes
But if it's
come with this, but if you still have a problem brushing, you could add this to those. Anything that you have a problem brushing on, CMC gum. Gum solution, sitting out front.
Pinpoint bottle for like drawing.
Yeah?
Can you use that
Yeah.
to thin out the Cone 10 glaze to draw?
Like the underglazes, you mean?
No.
You want to squirt or
trail or
trail
draw
with high fire glazes?
yeah.
Usually I'd want to, most high fire glazes, if I wanted that effect, yeah, I'd probably add some gum to that. I would add some gum, or maybe some this APT. This thing does a lot of different things. This can also extend the brushability of the glazes and things like that. Changes the consistencies in positive ways. I was going to demonstrate this, but I'm trying to brush some of this on and see if it's really hard to do it. Then add some CMC gum and show you that it works better. I could do that if you'd like.
And that's so that as far as the shelf life goes, if you mix your own glaze, so you can have gum in it, could it last?
Oh yeah. If you didn't put gum in it, like I said, I only will add gum really to the portions that I want to use to brush. Okay? You got a bucket full of blue glaze. You don't want to add a bunch of CMC into there. You want to scoop out what you want to brush out, pour it in a cup or bowl about what you think you might need. Add the CMC gum to that to make that brushable. Brush out what you need. You could always add more out of the bucket. Scoop some more out of the bucket. I'm gonna give myself a glaze mustache here. If you haven't, if you've never mixed a glaze before, has everyone here mixed a dry glaze? Never mixed a dry glaze? Oh, you do? No? Mixing dry glazes, it takes a little bit of equipment, a lot of the stuff you already have at your house, okay? But the one thing that you're going to need is a sieve, okay? To mix the dry glazes, remember you always want to wear a mask, okay? You want to wear a mask, number one. When you mix dry glazes, you want to measure the ratio that you want. Normally, a dipping glaze, this is a general rule, for dipping glazes, and I'll talk in pounds and ounces here. For every pound of dry glaze, because that's how we sell it, for every pound of dry powder of glaze, you put in about, or you mix it with about 12 ounces of water. So a pound of glaze is 16 ounces, right? You want to mix it with about 12 ounces of water. That's a very general ratio that we use with almost all of our mid-fire and high-fire glazes that we sell dry, okay? If you know the recipe, though, you know that it's got things that absorb a lot of water, like bentonite, like it's high in clay. There's a lot of clay in a recipe. Things like Chino glazes, textural glazes, they may need additional water because some of those materials absorb more water. A lot of the materials do not. They're simply suspended particles. All the feldspar, the silica, those things don't soak up any water. Some things do. Bentonite soaks up, it'll have like something like 7 or 8 times its volume after it's soaked up as much water as it can. In that particle size, they swell up quite a bit. You always want to mix, once you've got your water and your glaze ratio, and you've got your water mixed up to the amount of water that you want. To mix that glaze, you always have to, and this is the rule, always add dry to wet. Okay? If you're a baker or something like that, you probably know all that kind of stuff, right? And you always add your flour to the water, not the other way around.
Just do it the other way once, and you'll know why.
Yeah. Try adding the water, try pouring water in a bucket of dry material.
Yeah, it's
see how far it gets you.
Did you do that or you said it? I just heard
So
that
agitate
story
the water. Get the water moving, okay? Get the water moving and shake slowly your dry material in, okay? So that you're incorporating as you go. Always add the dry slowly.
I want to make the 5-gallon glaze.
Get some help, or scoop it. No, or you know, get yourself a quart-size, you know, jug and just scoop it out in a plastic container that you can grip, or maybe even warp and bend into like an oval shape. And while you're mixing, and do it scoop by scoop.
Measurement, I wanted to ask you how many pounds of dry powder to how much water would make a 5-gallon of
Your average, okay, your average 5-gallon bucket, right? It's enough for me to dip in, okay? Most glazes about 25 pounds of dry. We sell a lot of these glazes in 1 pound, 5 pound, 10 pound, 25 pound bag increments. And that 25 pounder is what is kind of universally sold by commercial makers like us of dry glaze, so that you can do a 5-gallon bucket. Okay, because that should get you, again, depending on the recipe, if you don't have to add extra water, you're going to get about 3 gallons or so out of that thing, 3.5. Some glazes that have high volume, you'll get 4, 4.5. If there's a lot of clay in that recipe, it might swell up and take out more of that bucket. So 25-pound bag is usually what we do for 5 gallons.
Would you start with a gallon or 2, right, of water?
Oh, so for that 25 pounds, so for that 25 pounds, you need 25 times 12 ounces. Right? Per pound. 12 ounces a pound. Who's the mathematician? Snap it out in here. I could usually do that. Same thing works with grams. Okay, you know, if you know the ratio, what is 12 to 16? It's 3/4, right? So just remember that ratio, 3/4. You use 1,000 grams, you need 750 grams of water. 1,000 grams of dry, 750 of water. Okay? The ratio is still there. It's like 3/4 to 10. Okay? After you've mixed your dry into the wet and you're stirring it, you keep stirring it until you get the lumps out. Okay? get those big lumps mixed in, right? Next thing you want to do is you want to sieve it, okay? That's the real piece of equipment besides the bucket, the glaze, whatever. Sieving. Now, sieving can be a pain in the butt. We sell a sieve, it's about that big, costs $17 or something like that. And it fits over a 5-gallon bucket, right? So if you mixed up a whole 5-gallon bucket, you can pay up that 5-gallon bucket and pour it through this sieve. But you got to work that glaze through that sieve. What works really good is a real stiff brush. Not a wire brush, but a very stiff brush, like one for that you use in a bristle brush, like a plastic bristle brush. What was that? Used for scouring pots and pans and stuff, like a kitchen sink brush. One of those that has the stiff plastic sort of bristles to it. I've also known some people to use like the toilet bowl brush thing, you know, that brush, but in a big bucket, because it helps stir it up somehow. They had those in their bucket. Yeah, a tight bristled brush, because what you're doing is you're forcing that glaze through that sieve. Okay.
The guys in Sunnyvale, they've got some kind of a thing where it's got like a...
We sell a product that's called a talisman spinning sieve.
Awesome.
Okay? And it's this V-shaped bowl that has a crank on it that's got 3 brushes that turn against the screen, and as you pour the glaze in, you spin the crank and these 3 brushes work to push it through the sieve screen. And
That sounds good.
That looks good. It's not cheap, but it's but what if you use a smaller sieve, get one of those kitchen brushes, a stiff bristle, plastic bristle kitchen brush. That works really good. I used my hand the other night and it wears down.
Oh yeah.
Okay, once you got it sieved, okay, you know that it's all homogeneous, right? But you just mixed it. That glaze it could still be full of bubbles and things like that. That if you allow the glaze to just rest for a while, it's going to do 2 things. It's going to fully wet those materials. The things like the clay and the bent, those things, they need some time to soak up that water. And for that glaze to be truly homogeneous. And not only the wetting, but it allows time for the bubbles to kind of come up to the surface. All that agitation, all that mixing, and all that sieving and stuff. If the glaze is kind of a viscous glaze, it's going to have a lot of bubbles in it. So if you needed to glaze right away, I would stir it to mix it up. But for another minute or so, I would just stir it very gently. I would make sure that I hit the sides. Sometimes bubbles collect around the outer surface against the wall of the bucket. I would stir it very gently. What that's going to do, you're not going to incorporate any air into it, like you do when you really mix it. But that real slow, what that does is it works the bubbles out, so that when you go and dip something in it, you may have less bubbles. There are those little pinholes in your glaze. You ever dipped a pot in a glazed bucket, you pull it out, and it soaks it in, and you got all these little pinholes in the glaze. Me personally, I've had instructors, and I've told people, and it's worked where I didn't do a darn thing. I dumped it. I wiped off the bottom, I put it on the shelf, and it had all these little tiny micro holes in the glaze. You've seen that? And I fired it, and everything was fine, right? It worked. It didn't matter. But now I go and I rub all those little bubbles out. I don't know why, I just do. But to me, I think I'm making it so that there'll be less of a chance of a bubble or an empty spot appearing in my glaze later. You never know what's going to happen in that fire. Bubbles also, I talked about bisque firing earlier. Even under normal bisque firing conditions, where you do a low temperature bisque, some places, I mean, every place I go and visit, I learned that they fire it different. We Bisque fire it at 08. You know, some people got a big kiln, they want to save money, they Bisque at like 010, 08. Real low Bisque temperatures. Other people Bisque higher. Sometimes you get, even though that glaze might not have any bubbles in it, and you dip a pot inside of it, you pull it out, and it's covered with those little holes all over the place. That's actually because the Bisque is under fired. It's almost too absorbent. You know what I mean? Why did my glaze run? It's possible that your Bisque was fired to too low a temperature so that it's really, really porous. And it soaks up glaze like a sponge. And a dip into a bucket of glaze, and you hold it in there and count to like 1,000, 2,000, and kind of pull the piece out. I guarantee you there's going to be a difference in the thickness of that glaze in a pot that was Bisque fired at 04 or 03 versus one that's been Bisque fired to 08.
Oh, it just sucks up way too much.
Because it's soaking up, slurping up more water because it's more porous, and you get thicker glaze, and it ran. Right? But last week's pot got, you know, the Bisque went up to a higher temperature, right? And same glaze, same clay. This one was Bisque fired in a different Bisque at a higher temperature. This piece was more absorbent than that piece. That one, you got a thicker layer of glaze on. You fire them right next to each other, kiln, that one ran. Why did that run? What's wrong with the glaze?
Yeah.
What's wrong with the person? What'd they do? I did the same thing to this one I did to that one. Bisque fire. Bisque fire. And
Now, what do you guys, I'm sorry.
I tend to see more of these little micro bubbles in the surface of my glaze on pots that are Bisque fired to lower Bisque temperatures.
What do you guys Bisque to here?
I Bisque everything here to 04. Slow into cone 04. Okay.
So one time I had a Bisque piece, or a glaze piece break, and it had black, the mug, the handle broke off, and had black. Is that what black pouring that meant it was not Bisque all the way through? And
Black coring. Especially if you've done higher temp firings, cone temp firings and gas kilns and things like that, there's a problem called black coring that can happen. In gas kilns use propane and other things to create combustion in the kiln. So they have fuel, and there's fuel and there's air. They combine in the kiln and combust. That creates the energy to fire the pieces. When you have an improper ratio of fuel, you ever heard the term running rich?
Yeah.
Right? Like most cars, like a carburetor, they tune their carburetor because it's running too rich. You get backfires, you get smoke, right? It's like firing a kiln. The ratio of air and fuel it can be off. Black coring most of the time it's a firing defect. It's a defect that happens to higher iron clay bodies, red clay bodies, or things like sandstone buff. I've seen it happen to our cinnamon clay, and I see it happen to Black Mountain, 811 red, things that have a fair amount of iron in them. Okay, so what happens? In the firing, that excess carbon, if there's not enough air to burn and combust inside the kiln, and you have smoke coming out the top or flames coming out the top, that means combustion is happening outside of the kiln, not inside of the kiln. And smoke is simply unburned fuel. It's carbon that should have combusted inside the kiln. So there's excess carbon in the atmosphere. A red clay is red because of iron. Okay? Normally, red iron is pretty refractory at lower temperatures, but can act has a body flux and help make a clay vitreous at lower temperatures. But once it's in the presence of high fire reduction firings, that people want to use copper reds and get reduction fired effects, celadons and copper reds and Chino glazes, things like those. People like to have a lot of reduction in the kiln. You can't get a copper red without reduction, because what happens is that in these high iron clays, the carbon will combine with the red iron that is in that red clay, and it will turn it to black iron. Now, black iron is a flux. It's a highly volatile flux. It melts a lot. So what happens is the smoke, the extra carbon inside the kiln, instead of combusting or going out, it exchanges molecules with the iron in your clay, and it turns it to black iron. The pot becomes brittle because it's overfluxed, and things start happening. Glaze starts to pop off. It's called shivering. The pot will crack upon cooling. It's called dunting. You might get a spiral crack or a big crack down through the side of it. You don't know why. It was because of that fluxing of the clay, and it became incredibly weak. So instead of being strong refractory, and then when you look at a cross section after this piece cracked on you, you break it in half and you look at it, and the inside of the wall of the actual clay has turned a gray color or a black color. That's because that's carbon that, trapped in the iron, black iron, weak pot, and dead piece. So we got like 10 minutes left, and I wanted to, anything else I wanted to cover? I'd love to take some questions if you have guys have written them down about anything else related to the application, problems you've experienced. Tong marks. Tong marks. Tong marks should not be a problem. Should not be a problem. What you do is you just leave. You grab the piece, you dip it in the glaze, you set it. What I like to do is with the tongs, after dipping the piece, let the excess glaze drip off. I will turn it and set the piece down, and I'll take two hands, I'll open up the tongs. You'll have probably two holes. Wait till the piece dries completely, pick it up, and you should just be able to take your finger and rub right over those tongue holes. What it'll do is little peaks form like a volcano around a little hole where there's no glaze. And that's enough extra glaze that when you rub across it, it'll fill in that little.
But I always have marks. You can see.
Okay, if you don't want to see them, do a little rub, but then take what's called a cleanup tool. We sell them here, or a rib, or a razor, or something sharp like a knife or a small knife, and go over it and actually shave away that glaze so that it's then level, so that you don't have a bump where that mark used to be. You got to shave it away. You got to use a small cleanup tool and then just blow it away, just to get that even mark, that even coat. Yeah, you often see dots. The question is, she read that porcelain is recommended to be higher bisque than stonework. Is it true? Why would it be true? Why would I fire my porcelain to a hotter bisque than my stoneware? In my experience, I really don't. I don't see a reason why you would need to do that. I don't see a reason. I don't see a reason. Potters, when they, I know that a lot of you might be working out of a studio somewhere where the bisque firing is, you don't do the bisque firing, it's all done by somebody else, right? I make my pot, I stick it on the shelf, and I come back in 2 weeks and it's bisque already, it's done. You don't have any of that level of involvement. But you could, and I'll tell you, a studio potter who has control of their own kiln, has control of their own materials and things like that, in the long run has a better chance, because you can experiment. You can say, I want to use these glazes and I want to dip them, or I want to spray them, or I want to brush them. I'm choosing to make decisions on my process where I say I want to do mid-range firing, and I want to mix my own glaze, and I want to dip them, and I want to be that process. Okay, so, and I say that person should dial in that process. Change the bisque fire, okay, to see how well a piece responds when you dip. Okay, if I mix up this glaze the same way every time, and I dip and I hold it down for 2 seconds and I pull it out, I want that to fire properly. Okay, in my kiln, and have consistent results every time. So I will test what my bisque fire temperature should be for that clay, for the glazes that you use, so that when you dunk it, it's going to have a proper coat. It's not too absorbent because you fired your bisque too low, that it gets too thick of a glaze when you dunk it in there. You can make those adjustments on your own when you have control. If you don't, talk to the people that do the actual firing. What are you bisque firing to? Maybe you want to try a different clay that's less absorbent, maybe. Porcelains, things that have a higher flux content, wider clay versus stonewares. That may be possible, possibly a reason why someone would take something to a higher temperature bisque versus another. Maybe they said that because in their experience with the glazes that they use, they got good results by firing this clay, this porcelain clay, at a different bisque temperature than their stoneware clay. Maybe the absorption just happened out that way when they do their glazing. So they're all tied together, yeah.
So when you're mixing you're adding something like the oxide to your base glaze.
Yeah.
How do you get it to be consistent? For example, like I did it for some ornaments, and the first time the glaze looked good after the firing, but then the next day I was trying to remix it, and that one, it didn't come out. So I couldn't really see how do you know it's mixed in well?
One thing, if your glaze, say you mix up a sample of glaze color, and use it the next day and it's different, maybe that's because there's some settling issues.
Yeah, no, and I mean you stirred it up, but it's
maybe all of those materials, maybe it did settle out, and the cobalt. You mentioned the blue. Yeah. Cobalt's a very heavy element in comparison to a lot of these others. That would be the first one to settle to the very bottom of a glaze bucket. And so, if your glaze did settle in a certain way overnight, and you mix it up, but you didn't really mix it up, and you get that cobalt resuspended, you would definitely see a difference in the color. Cobalt's a very, very strong. Doesn't take much. Doesn't take much. Very, very powerful colorant.
You have to re-sieve it. I read somewhere Ron Roy re-sieves every time he wants to reuse a glaze.
Well, not a bad idea. Just in case you got, sometimes you get splashes of dunk on the inside of the bucket. The glaze levels down here, but up the walls all the way to the top, you got splashes of glaze and dry chunks and stuff like that.
I scraped it off.
It's a good thing to do is to scrape it off and remix it in. And heck, if you want to have consistent results every single time, then for him, he sieves it every time, so he knows.
Matt, how do you keep glazes that you don't use that often suspended? I find that I'll get concrete at the bottom when I haven't used it for
Okay.
a couple months.
Okay. This subject happens all the time. You know, a lot of content studios, people use some low fires. I'll start with low fires. In low fire, there are suspending agents, okay? And there are those gums that I talked about that help it brush on. Gum is an organic material, okay? It's an organic material. And when I say that these brush-on glazes and stuff, they have a shelf life, it's really because of the gum. It's because of the gum. Gum is food for bacteria, okay? You ever a glaze smell funny? Right? Bacteria. Sometimes bacteria will grow inside of a glaze that has gum in it, and all the brushing glazes do, they got that gum. Okay, it's an organic thing that bacteria will feed on. It will make it smell, it will make it, once it eats the gum, right? And you got a smelly glaze that is separated, and you can't get it to resuspend. You actually, there's a couple of things you could do. You could put in a few drops of a few different like disinfectants that will help kill that bacteria, okay? That may not be dangerous to you, but it could be dangerous to them. And some people actually they will take just a tiny pinch, a very, very small pinch of copper carbonate, right? A very, very, very fine amount. I mean, talking just a teeny, teeny bit. That wouldn't affect your glaze color because it's such a small amount. But copper, you ever wrap copper or seen a slug or something like that? Try and cross copper. You know, copper will kill a lot of this bacteria. A disinfectant. Some people put a drop of formaldehyde or a drop of bleach or a drop of something in that glaze. That's just enough to kill this bacteria that's growing. But it's in such a small amount that it's not going to hurt you. Okay, you can add that to your glaze. But then you got to add some bentonite, or in the case of these bottle glazes, something called macalloy, which is a very pure bentonite, and then re-add some of that gum to help make it brushable and suspendable.
I have a million questions, but
Million more questions.
there's a
Yep,
crowd.
it's
Big crowd.
Well, thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks for
Matt.
having that discussion. And if you have questions, please bring the papers, hand them to me, and I will answer your questions over email. I promise.